In the last lectures, we had a look at props. Props, simply an object giving us access to all the attributes we pass to our own components. Now, sometimes you don't want to get some information from outside, but you want to have it inside a component and change it from inside there too. So, for example, here in our app.js file, let's say we also want to add a button which, if we click it, simply switches one of the names we use here. So where we simply put a caption of switch name maybe. Well, we'll come to handling this click event in the next lectures. But first of all, we need to define these names here in a non-hard-coded way. Right now it's hard-coded into our JSX code, and this is okay here. But if we later want to change it, we have to store it in some variable or something like that. Well, this actually is a class, and a class has properties. This is not just the case in JavaScript, but in other programming languages too. You can kind of think of a property as a variable of a class. So in normal JavaScript code, you would simply write var something equals some value. This doesn't work in a class. There, you can simply write something equals some value. So a bit shorter, but in the end, the same you could say. There's one special property you can define in any component which extends component. So you can't do it in person. You can't define properties here anyways, because that's a normal function. So here you would have to use some constants or some variables. Still, what we're about to do only works in components which are created by extending component. There we can define a special property named state. Whereas props are set and passed from outside, like name and age into the person component, state is managed from inside a component. Now, important, this state property here is only available like this in components that extend components, so in class-based React components. Now actually, with React 16.8, a new feature was released called React Hooks, on which I'll have a whole module towards the end of the course, and which I'll also already introduce in this module here a little later. And with that new feature, you can actually also manage state in functional components. Now, for now, we'll not use that though. I'll talk about this in more detail later in this module. And therefore, we'll add state here in this class-based components, which is the default way of adding it. Still, you should use function components as often as possible, because you should use state with care. Because having state in all your components and manipulating it from anywhere in your app makes your app quickly unpredictable and hard to manage, especially as it grows. Of course, it doesn't mean you shouldn't use it at all though. Here it makes perfect sense. We initialize it by assigning a value, and this value is a JavaScript object. Again, this is a reserved word, and we should use it if we want to manage, well, some component internal data, you should say. So now the state could have some persons. This is totally up to you. I simply create a persons property in this JavaScript object. And this will be an array. And you can set up any kind of data you want in this state object. You could set up a name property, which is some name. You can really manage whatever you want. Here I want to manage an array of persons though. Now this persons array again is an array of JavaScript objects where each object has a name, maybe Max, and an age, maybe 28. A number here, not a string. Unlike down there where we do pass a string, but a number is fine for me here. I also want to have another one here, name Manu and age 29, and a third one, you guessed it, for Stephanie, which has an age of 26. Now this is my state. We can now access a property like this, and that's not just true for state, but for any property, in our render method by simply outputting something dynamic with single curly braces as you learned it, and then the this keyword. This refers to the class due to our ES6 syntax we're using. And on our class, we have a render method we could call. We shouldn't do that though, React does that. But we have a state property. And as I said, you can also define your own properties, but state is a special one, as you will learn over the next lectures. So here we can then access this state, and on state, my persons array, there may be the first element by using index 0, and then the name. So instead of hard coding it, I'm now accessing this property in this object here in the persons array on the state property. Now I'll copy this code here and replace my age with it too. There I of course want to access the age property. And I'll replicate this for menu, but here it's of course the first element, the second element with index 1 in this array. And for the age, I'll also access element 1 and of course the age property. And for Stephanie, you probably guessed that, index 2 and also for the age, index 2 and age property. With that, if we save this and we go back to the application, we see the button which doesn't do anything, and we see the same output as before. This time using a property, the state property though. Now, I said state would be a special property. Thus far, we don't use it in a special way though. We can change this. State can be changed, and if it changes, and that's the special thing about it, and it only works on that state property, if it changes, it will lead React to re-render our DOM, or to update the DOM, I should say. So if we change the name of Max here, for example, this will lead to this being re-rendered. And let me prove it to you by also showing you how to listen to events, like clicking on this button.